Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Carly Riley. For the past month plus, I have been covering the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. I went to court every day to bring you all that you needed to know about this historic case. And I have got a story time for us today. For folks who don't know, I was the finance director for Andrew Yang's presidential campaign in the 2020 election cycle. So I still have a number of friends who are in politics and in the political world. And they have been bit by bit sharing stories with me about the Bankman-Fried's involvement with politics that are really wild and fascinating. And I finally would like to tell you some of those stories here today. But before I do that, if you are enjoying these videos, if you've been enjoying this channel, please do consider subscribing, like, comment, share it with a friend, whatever. I really appreciate y'all have been so supportive, and I just appreciate you engaging with this content. All right, let's dive into it today. So most people know that the Bankman-Frieds were very politically oriented, politically involved, philanthropically inclined, or at least they gave lip service to that effect. And this was particularly true for Sam's mother and his brother. So Sam's mom was a longtime Democratic political donor. She was a Stanford lawyer, as folks might know. I did a whole video on the parents because their involvement in the FTX empire is one that raises a lot of questions. So you can go check out that video if you're so inclined. But anyways, his mom was very involved in an organization called Mind the Gap, which is a massive PAC that gives to Democratic causes. And his brother Gabe ended up running and being very involved in a number of PACs once Sam got really, really rich and was just like throwing money at them to do with what they wanted. Now, the Bankman-Frieds spent millions of dollars trying to get candidates elected and spending money on the political process. And their results were like atrociously bad. So I want to talk about all of that. And I want to talk about why what they did didn't work to such a ridiculous degree. But first, I want to talk about like what they were doing, because parts of this I feel like parts of the story are known and parts of the story I feel like are less known. So let me say it like this. Along with everything else, these folks were effective altruists. Y'all have, I'm sure, heard this term, heard about effective altruism. It's believing that you can, like, through reason, and you can find the best ways to prioritize spending to help the most amount of people. It's actually an ideology that I didn't know about before the Bankman-Frieds, and I haven't really looked into it fully, but like, I probably agree with it. I'm probably an effective altruist, if I'm being honest. It feels like it'd be in the vein of things that I like ideologically subscribe to. But in any case, not the point. So Gabe gets all this money from his brother. He's running one or multiple PACs or whatever the situation may be. And they're spending money on congressional races and candidates around the country. And they're interested in getting them to subscribe to effective altruism because that's their big cause. They want to get candidates elected who like effective altruism. And what I've heard anecdotally is that Gabe, this is a bit of a colloquial way to phrase this, but was like trying to get various candidates. He was very involved, for example, in the Ohio special election. And he's like trying to get candidates to read some book about effective altruism. And his whole pitch is basically like, hey, read this book about effective altruism, some fucking 400-page intellectual tome or whatever. Again, I'm being colloquial here. I don't actually know exactly what the book was. And if you do, and if you can demonstrate to me that you understand the tenets of effective altruism and you will make decisions according to effective altruism, I will give you like millions of dollars. Like I will bankroll you. You're set. Don't worry about it. Just show me that you understand this book. And like no one did. Like he just like can't get candidates even with like the $1 million carrot and all the money they're spending and everything. Like he just like can't get people to care about this book. Again, I'm being reductive, but still, this is what I've heard from a few different people. Okay. So he's like, all right, this isn't working. Like, I can't get these people to care. Damn politicians, whatever. So plan B becomes, I'm going to make a candidate factory. Screw these politicians who don't understand effective altruism. Screw this process of going to candidates and trying to make them effective altruists. I'm going to go to the effective altruists and I'm going to make them candidates. So that becomes the second part of the story. Now, I want to tell you about two particular candidates that came about in this way. First one is a gentleman named Carrick Flynn, who ran in Oregon 6th, the Oregon 6th district. And as far as I can tell, and according to what Carrick has said and things and others, like he didn't necessarily know the Bankman-Frieds, but he was an effective altruist who was running for office and was encouraged by various folks, perhaps folks in the Bankman-Fried orbit. And the Bankman-Frieds and their PACs and their various whatever spent millions supporting this candidate. Literally like 11, $13 million, outspent other candidates in the race like 10 to 1 or more. Like just absolute monstrous spending. And Carrick lost. So they like, as somebody told me, they were like, that's kind of unheard of in politics. To spend like $13 million on a fairly small congressional seat and lose is crazy. Like things have gone very off the rails for you if you're spending that much money and not getting the results you want. Now, I feel bad for Carrick because I actually think he seems like a lovely guy. I've read a bit about his policies now. I've read about his candidacy. I'm like, if I was in Oregon 6, I probably would have voted for you. So this is not to shade Carrick or any of these candidates specifically. It is to talk about a process and a system that was very broken, or I should say that is broken, but that the Bankman-Frieds just like totally failed to play well. And again, we're going to talk about why. Like, why did this not work and what were they doing that was just so poorly handled? But I want to tell you about this second candidate next, because this is the one I feel like I haven't heard stories about like this as much in the press and reported about, but this is even a wilder case to me. So this is a young woman, and I know somebody who spoke with her, and she had been recruited by the Bankman-Frieds and the people in their orbit, where she did not work in politics. She lived in California. She worked, I think, in like pandemic preparedness or whatever, which is one of the big causes for these EA people. And basically, to tell the story very colloquially, how it's been told to me, she like gets a call one day from the people, and they're like, hey, we think you could be a great political candidate. You're an EA. We want you to quit your job and dedicate yourself to politics, and we're going to fund this whole thing. And they convince her, and then they're like, and we've done an analysis. And despite the fact that you are from California and live in California, we think our analysis shows you should run in Rhode Island. And so at the time that my friend spoke to this woman, she was planning on the following month moving from California to Rhode Island. She was like, they're not stupid. They know I'm not going to win a congressional seat in Rhode Island, having just moved there from California. So the plan was that she was going to like ingratiate herself into Rhode Island life for a couple years or whatever it was. She was going to run for local offices, and then she was going to work her way up and in time run for a congressional seat. And they were funding some amount of this whole thing, right? Like unclear, perhaps they were paying for her life. I don't know. I think they paid off her student loans. Just this massively expensive project to get one person, to try and get one woman elected in Rhode Island who, as far as we know, had no prior political experience and who was not from Rhode Island. Now, one of the reasons I think that there's probably truth to this, whether or not this story is 100% as I just described it or is slightly different, is there was this quote from Barbara Fried in a lawsuit filed against Joe Bankman and Barbara Fried from FTX. FTX, the current management of FTX, is suing them because they are trying to claw back a bunch of money from them. I did a whole episode on this if you want to go check it out. And in that complaint, they include a quote from Barbara Fried from an email she sent in December of 2021. And this email was supposedly sent to Sam Bankman-Fried and to Gabe Bankman-Fried, his brother. Here's what it says. We need to start thinking through the disclosure issue now to make sure we protect Sam and FTX. Plays at the state level especially are going to provoke accusations of carpetbagging. Now, carpetbagging is when you move from one state to another because you think you have a better chance of winning an election in that other state, even if you're not actually from that state. And it's seen as sort of a cynical way to play politics. Hillary Clinton has been accused of this before. It's like, oh, you care more about being a politician than you care about actually like the place that you're running for or whatever you're running to represent. I mean, it's almost a quaint notion now because I feel like politics is so cynical at this point. But this would, to a degree, and substantiate what we're saying, which is that there was this plan around this like candidate factory, and some of the candidates are going to be from the place they're running in. For example, Carrick Flynn was actually from Oregon, but you're also going to have candidates who are running in entirely different states from where they're from. Okay. None of this worked. So this flying candidates across the country to run for some sort of like 5 to 10 year plan, it seems wildly harebrained to me and just so expensive for the results you're probably going to get. But even the spending they were doing on existing candidates just fell so flat. That was consistently what you heard from people within the I heard from people within the political sphere. Was just like, it was crazy. What they were doing was crazy and ineffective. Just did not work. I mean, they spent, I believe the number is somewhere between like 70 million and $100 million in political spending. And the results they got for that were atrocious, both in terms of not getting the candidates they wanted elected, but also then in terms of just enacting an agenda. So I want to talk about those two things now, the enacting the agenda and getting candidates elected, and why it failed so badly. 3 reasons I want to outline here. Let's start with number 1. The way somebody put it to me was people could smell crypto from a mile away. Like, people aren't stupid, and also the Bankman-Frieds weren't actually being that subtle as much as they were at times optically trying to be subtle. So this one kind of speaks for itself, but like with using Carrick Flynn as an example, it was very widely known that the Bankman-Frieds and their PAC were spending millions of dollars on his race. And to be clear, you can't actually coordinate with a candidate. The way this stuff works is there's a limit to how much you can donate to an individual or a company can donate to a candidate. So I think that the limit right now is $3,300. When I was in politics, it was $2,800. In any case, so, Sam and his brother and all these people could only donate $3,300 a pop to Carrick Flynn. So what you're talking about is they were running a PAC that would do the spending on behalf of Carrick Flynn themselves without really directly coordinating with Carrick. So that's a lot of their money. The millions of dollars they spent were probably spent on like TV ads, for example, that they would strategically mastermind. And it was known that they were doing this. So Carrick's opponents would run ads and would talk a lot about how Carrick was basically bought by these crypto people. Whether or not that was true, whether or not Carrick was going to like enact a pro-crypto agenda, which he claimed he wasn't, but who knows? It was true. That was the impression they were able to paint of Carrick.
If Carrick Flynn wins this race, democracy is dead.
And it just tainted every candidate they touched as being this like crypto money person. And it was just very obvious to everyone that this was what was happening. Somebody said to me they should have done much more like what the Koch brothers did for a long time, which is run these TV ads in the Midwest in ways that you could say totally secretive and anonymous. People didn't know the Koch brothers were behind them, and they're running them about China taking your jobs and oil and whatever they were lobbying for. But it was all done very clandestinely. And so there wasn't this taint associated with it in the sense that you didn't know who was really behind it. And that's so important in politics. And I have to say this, even when you're talking about in Congress, the issues that become really flashy, when you make an issue really flashy and really big, that's when it becomes a political football and nothing gets done, because it becomes a way for both sides to grandstand about it, to make it a talking point. If you really want to get things done in DC, you want to stay under the radar. So that was the opposite, it seemed, of what the Bankman-Frieds were doing. They were being very flashy about their spending, about what they were doing. Okay, and it ultimately did not work at all. Number 2, this one cracks me up. Nobody cares about effective altruism. The issues they were trying to push and that the candidates they liked were running on, like, people didn't care about. Talking about these lofty, esoteric global goals is just like not a winning strategy with voters. Voters care about healthcare and gas prices and the money in their pocket. And as much as we may think that pandemic preparedness is something we should all care about now because of COVID-19 and what's happened, like, voters just aren't moved to go to the ballot box over those things. So that was the second problem, is they really apparently, and this is according to people I talked to, like, there was just such a disconnect between their ability, their ideals, and then their ability to turn those ideals into concrete things to get voters galvanized around. And then finally, and this is a really big one, this goes to their ability to get their agenda enacted broadly and with people within Washington. They apparently really weren't seen as like legitimate long-term players by a lot of people. And the comparison got made to me here was George Soros, and I think the Koch brother analogy that I gave earlier would also be a good one, where love or hate the agendas of a George Soros or a Koch brothers or whatever, they have always been seen as legitimate players who are going to be here for the long haul. And so work with them and get them what they want, because there's more where that came from down the line. And apparently it just, according to some people, and who knows, right? Washington, D.C. is a big place with a lot of different kinds of people. But for the people I've spoken with, it was just like, it always felt a little short term and splashy. And it was like, yes, gobble up the money now, but this isn't necessarily something that's going to be around for the long term. So like, the will of people who took their money to actually do what they wanted was much more limited than they probably would have wanted it to be. And somebody else said to me, the other issue was the money became so corruptive in the sense that nobody would give them an honest read on what people were thinking or saying in DC because everybody was trying to drink from their spigot essentially, and so nobody would tell them the truth. So that they actually were pretty hindered in their ability to get honest intelligence on what they should be doing, what was happening, because everybody was just telling them what they wanted to hear. And I think that's really interesting as well, and not necessarily their fault. I mean, again, it's the fault of being overly splashy with the money you have and not being more strategic about it and being more withholding about it, frankly. But it was also a reality of them and their wealth. Okay, so what do we make of all this? I mean, I think for me, I don't begrudge the fact that they wanted to have influence, that they wanted to get candidates elected, that they were trying to push this ineffective wow, I actually meant to say effective altruism agenda, but I literally Freudian slip said ineffective altruism agenda. But I have obviously a huge issue with the fact that this was coming from customer money. And then the other big issue here is just it was so ineffective, right? There's this it feels like everything else that existed in their empire, which is it's this combination of arrogance and yet ineffectiveness and just spending so much money so quickly. And perhaps, to be fair, things take time. You know, they didn't end up having their 10, 20 years to let this stuff marinate to see if they could have really had an impact on things. But the way they were going about it, from everybody I've heard, it just seems like it never was going to work. Now, maybe they would have learned, maybe they would have got wisened up to certain things, but they came out so loud and so splashy on things that it just completely inhibited their ability to actually get anything done. It's really cynical, right? It's really cynical to feel like, if we have all the money and we're so smart, we're just going to go and place these candidates all around the country and let our will be done because we're the smart ones and we're the ones with the money. Now, again, that's partly a problem with the system. And frankly, they weren't able to get away with that. But it is a very cynical way to look at the country's democracy. All right, folks. That is our episode for today. No video tomorrow. I'll be back next week. My plan right now, I'm trying to do videos Monday through Thursday. It's a little bit ambitious of a goal because some of this stuff does require a good amount of research, but that's the plan for now. Stay tuned. We'll see how things evolve, but I really appreciate you being here. If you did enjoy this episode, please do like, subscribe, comment, engage, do all the things. Share this video if you enjoyed it. And I just really appreciate how y'all have been supportive and engaging with the content. So with that, have an awesome weekend, folks. I will see you next week.